Y'all know what it is.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Eggs. Today's special guest is co-founder of Truesix and PR manager at DeskTime, Julia Gifford. Julia is a Canadian-born tech enthusiast, writer, and entrepreneur focused on helping small brands succeed through content marketing, social media marketing, public relations, and more. Julia's expertise has helped her many clients and her own business achieve broad exposure to ever larger audiences. She does this by leveraging data you may not even know you have, spinning it into compelling stories designed to enhance engagement across all channels of communication, from social media to mass market publications like Forbes, Fast Company, and Inc. magazine, to name a few. Julia joins us today for an exciting conversation about getting media coverage even when you don't think you have anything newsworthy to say, how to amplify your business through content marketing, how public relations can take your organization to the next level, and so much more. Please join us in welcoming to the show, Julia Gifford. Hey, Julia, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So thanks so much for doing this. I have to ask, I saw on your LinkedIn profile that you were in Latvia. Are you actually calling in from Latvia today?
I am, and it's 10:30 at night over here.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for staying up late for us. I appreciate it. Yeah. Cool. So why don't you kind of start at the beginning? Tell us how you got to where you're at now, what you do, what Truesix is, and yeah, go from there.
So my starting career is a pretty considerably typical one. I was in college, and as a student, I needed to support myself. So I found a part-time job, which happened to be at this startup conglomerate. It's this big company that just churns out company after company. It's called the Roghaar Group, based in Latvia. And it was great timing. They had already created products that had totally taken over the Latvian market, and they were starting to reach out into the international market. So they needed an English speaker, and I was there. And so as I graduated my bachelor's program, that part-time job turned into a full-time job. And the startups that we started to build continued to grow. And one of them, called Printful, is now Latvia's first unicorn, and another one of them is DeskTime, which is a startup that we started working on almost immediately after I joined, and I'm still working on it to this day, even though I don't work at that company anymore. I have since started my own company with a co-founder, and we loved working together with DeskTime so much that they remained our clients even as we left the group. And so we've really been with them since day one, and it's been a really wild ride, and we've had so much flexibility to do whatever we want, and have made some very interesting moves to get some pretty insane viral publicity. And that's really what I want to talk about today, and hopefully help other entrepreneurs realize the potential for publicity, even when you think that there might not be any.
Yeah, I love that. And it's awesome too that you mentioned Printful.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up.
Yeah, while you were talking, I was thinking, we talked to a lot of, Latvian startups and tech companies and things like that. Obviously this is a hotbed for that type of thing, but we actually had head of marketing for Printful, Rydas Purins, on our show. I don't know, it's been some time ago, back in March 2020, but I'm also a customer of Printful. So it's a pretty fun connection to make. So
yeah, for sure.
I guess then let's get into that a little bit and talk about how that works. So I think there's a lot of people who really do want more media coverage, or at least think they want it. But I think very few people actually know where to get it. So do you want to maybe talk a little bit about, how we could get started looking for more media coverage and what to talk about when it feels like we don't have anything to say?
For sure. And this is one of the things that we struggled with early on, before we had any experience with this. And our experience came from the ground up, just by trying and doing and experimenting. And we found that we didn't necessarily have anything newsworthy. Other startups were getting media coverage with major multi-million-dollar funding rounds, but we were bootstrapped. We didn't need funding rounds. We had already found our own profit, which is arguably even better, but that's a topic for a different conversation. And yeah, so we didn't have anything like major happening. It was just software that was doing well and it was serving its users. And so we were starting to think about what it is that we can work with to get that visibility, because this is particularly true for companies that are outside of their core market. So European companies, for example, that want to sell products to an American market, which is one of the biggest markets in the world, it's really difficult to get that visibility. And one of those ways to get it, get in front of these eyeballs from across the ocean is through media visibility. So what we sat down and thought about was that we are in fact sitting on a treasure trove of user behavior data. So DeskTime in this case, it's a productivity app. People install it on their computers and it tracks how you spend your time at the computer so that afterwards you can analyze how you spent your day and how you can improve in the future. So it's kind of for like a productivity hacking type of person. And so we have these hundreds of thousands of users all over the world tracking how they use their computer. And so we realized that this is a sociologist's dream. They have all of this data stored. And so what we decided is, are there different angles and different data sets that we can pull out that can inform us about some kind of user behavior that is interesting to the wider public. And it started out like really lowbrow. So this was at the time when standing desks were like all the rage. Any office that was a cool office started implementing standing desks, and there were claims that they're better for productivity, better for health, but no one really had any data to back it up. And at that time, our office, which was a super styling office, we also got a few standing tables. So we implemented this experiment that using DeskTime, the productivity software, we would spend time working at the standing table. And then using that data, we were able to compare it to, for example, a week where we weren't using the standing desk, and then see if our productivity had increased or decreased. So that way.
So what's the answer? Because I just bought one and I want to know if I'm getting more work done.
You might not be happy with the answer. The answer was It depends. But the result was, though, that we were the only ones that had any kind of hard data to actually prove this hypey hypothesis that standing tables are going to change the way you work. In reality, it depends on how you use it, and it might help you, while you're standing, it might help you get moving on some tasks where you have to execute, but maybe for more creative tasks, it's better to be able to sit down and sit back and just kind of ponder. So that's the kind of the gist of the outcome. But the result was that we had realized and stumbled upon this concept and this approach of taking the data that we already had, that was generated by our users, that we owned, and packing it into a newsworthy aspect. And so this article was published on ReadWrite Web, which was at that time a very hot IT tech platform and publicity. So we started taking this method and replicating it right, left, and center. We tried the same thing, but working on a yoga ball when working on yoga balls started becoming trendy. Most recently, we're still doing it. Most recently, my co-founder we had found several TikTok productivity hacks and put them to the test using this data. But hands down, our most successful campaign was one that we used a wide variety of our user data. What we did is we isolated the top 10 most productive people using DeskTime, and just scanned through to see if we could find something that they had in common. I had a few hypotheses. For example, maybe they start working like super early, like 5 a.m. club type thing, or maybe they start working super late, and more in line with circadian rhythms and that sort of thing. That was all debunked, but one thing I did find was that what they all had in common was that they work on average in 52-minute sprints and then break for 17 minutes away from the computer and then come back for another 52-minute sprint. So we published this data, and even still, if you Google 5217, then you will get troves of articles. There's a Wikipedia page all about this research that I had essentially conducted using just our software user data.
That's amazing.
And it really.
How many users were involved when you, like, are we talking 20,000 or more? Like, is that what you're pulling from?
I'm not going to remember the figures off the top of my head. We do have several articles on them on the DeskTime website, as well as probably news sites around the internet. But if it was the top 10% of DeskTime's users at that time, which was, I don't know, it's about 7 years ago now, then that's probably somewhere at like the 20 to 40K area, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because we've talked about something similar in the past called Pomodoros, and Ryan has implemented that. And the interesting part to me is that people are naturally kind of doing that, 50-minute sprints, then taking a break and coming back to another. And I've noticed that I kind of do that myself as well. But it seems like I've got about 40 minutes in me of just solid focus, and then I got to take a break. And then I got
exactly. And there's so much science and data to support it that people can only focus and have deep work time for a certain amount of time before they need to give their mind a little bit of a rest. They need to get away from the computer, and then when they come back, then they can get back into it at the same level of intensity. And what we also found was that by giving yourself these breaks, you can also continue working for a longer period of time. Whereas if you're forcing yourself to be working for, just sitting at your desk from, morning to lunch, and then from lunch to the end of the workday, you're going to be burnt out around 3 p.m. and just like sick of it. But if you've been forcing yourself to take these breaks, then there's just more energy to continue. And this was one of our major successes. And what we did is we had this data that we had aggregated, and we had offered it to all of the major sites, so Fast Company, Inc., VentureBeat, all of these Mashable. They all said no, or they ignored us or whatever. And then, dejected, we kind of lowered our expectations and went for a maybe less well-known, less, a website that didn't have as much traffic or renown as some of the other ones that I mentioned. And we landed on the Daily Muse, which is a careers website, and they were happy to publish it. And it turns out that they have a deal with Mashable. And the next day after it was published on the Muse, we saw our article on the front page of Mashable. And then from there, it just got republished into every single one of the news outlets that had rejected me the previous week.
Okay.
So there's some beautiful irony in there, and just keep trying and keep pitching, and eventually you'll get there.
Yeah, I love that. Hey, so I wonder, could we talk about, in you guys' case, you obviously had the software platform that you'd created already, and you were collecting data, steady on everybody who uses the platform. But for most people, or like a lot of people you might consult with, smaller businesses and things like that, maybe they don't have this kind of data. Can you talk about maybe some places where people could dig to try and, I guess, sort of put together a news story based on maybe limited data that they might have collected?
For sure. And the beauty about this is that at least every software product is going to be sitting on a database of their user behavior. So even if it's not a productivity tool or something like that, you still have information about how users are using your service. And based on what that area is, I'm confident that there's always an angle that you can find that will be interesting to a wider audience, maybe not like the whole world, but certainly maybe in your niche. So for example, when I was working at Printful, then we decided to replicate this process. And there's one thing that the industry loves, or like the retail industry and e-commerce industries, they love original statistics about like growth of sales from like on a year-to-year basis, and especially around like the biggest sales days of the year, which are Black Friday, Cyber Monday, all of these. And so so based on orders at Printful, and Printful has several, I mean, many stores that are hooked up to the service, and people are buying at those stores. So it gives you a kind of broad representation about e-commerce activity on these days. And as a result, we were quick to get our programmers and data scientists to pull out statistics. We did the math, figured out how much percentage of growth, more purchases you can expect on Black Friday versus a non-Black Friday, and then there you go. You've got original industry data that is very sought after by many people, because there are tons of people who are writing articles, and they need original statistics. So if you're that's one way. Okay. And and there are different ways to go about that. So like, even if you have like some kind of other software, you can see like, how effective, I don't know, you have maybe several products. You can tell them over the course of time how one kind of product category has grown in popularity over time. And you can find out, and you can do the math and figure out the percentage of growth for that product, and then you can craft a piece around that. There are so many options, and any software product is going to have this database. So it's just thinking about, okay, what might people theoretically be interested in? What kind of data are we collecting, and how can we package that to be newsworthy?
Okay, so you started to say, or you did say, a couple examples of the types of information that these media groups like, for example, original information about sales growth and things like that. Are there other examples of the types of stories or the types of news or the types of information that are most attractive to these different media platforms?
Yeah, so original data is an incredible direction to go in. And if you can find your original data and create your own original data points, and that's already incredible. You might not always have occasions for that. So for example, with Printful, there's the Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and holiday season, but they might not have that same kind of interest, mid-June, for example. But then there are other things that you can do in the meantime. And one of those things is publishing and coming up with provocative opinions, sharing your hot takes on topics. So for example, one of my earliest success pieces was sharing the opinion that infographics are dead. And this was at a time when everyone was making infographics. The infographic was the hot thing to do. But coming out and saying, no, they're dead. There's a new kid in town, and this was because we had built, also for DeskTime, it was at that time it was super cool. It was a landing page where you scroll through the website, and then you'd have like the different data and statistics fly in, and it was animated and that kind of thing. So it was kind of like an advanced web infographic. So the hot take was that infographics are dead, and here are a few examples of next level like infographics. And so that was very, very well picked up. And if like you can have that kind of hot take about your industry, or that goes against popular opinion, then that's one option that you can pitch to media. And if it's within your industry, then that's a way to generate buzz and recognizability, recognition, and product recognition, brand recognition across the web.
How important is the pitch to media versus just, hey, we got a blog, we've written these articles, and let nature do its course and hope that people come and visit your site? That pitch to media, it seems like it's the next step to actually getting eyes on your article.
Yeah, there are different approaches, and and there's plenty to be said about both. So for example, we had a piece. We had done some research on the impact on music on productivity. How we had listened to different genres within our entire team, tracked our collective performance, and compared which genre made us work better and whatnot. And we pitched it around to several media outlets, and no one really picked it up. And we decided to publish it on the blog. So it's our own readership, and yeah, we have plenty of blog readers as well. But it's not the same as getting in front of these massive audiences. But a curious thing happened, that it started becoming referenced by journalists that were writing articles on music and the impact of music on productivity, because we were one of the few places that had that original data. So if you have some really great original data, I mean, ideally, I would say, yeah, try and pitch it out. But if that's not an option, then it's also not the end of the world. And by having it on your website, and of course doing everything you can to make it visible, the search engine optimization stuff, sharing on social media, and that kind of thing, sharing on forums, helps get that word out. But yeah, the pitch is very important, and it's a key aspect. And writing a successful pitch email to a media outlet is an art in and of itself, and something that I've spent my entire career perfecting and developing. And one approach doesn't work for every journalist, and there are also differences in who you're pitching and what you offer them. So for example, there are a website or a news site will likely have an editor who's at the top, and they decide what articles get published or not. And there are journalists who are underneath them, and they're the ones that actually write the pieces, but they have to clear the topics with the editor. Meanwhile, yeah, so if there's a case where you want to write the article yourself, then you would go to the editor, not to the journalist, because the journalists want to be doing the writing themselves. So if you've got a ready-made article, you can go to the editor. If you only have a press release, you can go to a journalist. And so there are differences in that. Also, yeah, giving the reasons why this topic is relevant, particularly right now. It helps journalists have like the ammo to go and clear it with their editors. Meanwhile, if the editor sees that the stuff is good, then it's easy for them to just clear the way for your content. So the approaches there are also different.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you, you just touched on something that I think might be kind of interesting. That is, choosing topics, right? So we talked before about the kinds of information that these big publications like to pick up, original data and that kind of thing. But is there a way to sort of, I guess, read the tea leaves for what's hot at any given moment? So it seems to me that by the time you see something pop up on, your favorite news aggregator or whatever, like that hot item has maybe already happened. Is there a way to sort of stay up on the trends and understand what's next so that you could be sort of positioning your data to fit that need?
Yeah, well, this is really where personal expertise comes into play, and keeping up with what's relevant in your industry so that you are the one that can approach these media outlets and say, hey, listen, I know this topic, and I know that like this is going down. This isn't the way we do it anymore. Something like that. Or if you see, it's a lot of serendipity. So for example, with the trendy office gadgets, the standing desks, the yoga balls, all of this stuff, it's kind of just observing the hype and thinking, okay, can I add to it? Is there any way that I can add to this conversation? The conversation is already happening. Can I jump in on it? And the thing is, when there is a hot topic, journalists and editors and news sites, they are interested in publishing as much as they can about that certain topic if people are interested in reading it. So if you can offer content that relates to this trendy topic in a timely way at the right time, then editors will be super interested in taking up that offer. So one example is we were working with an e-commerce platform called Sellfy, This was at the time when SoundCloud was going through possible bankruptcy processes. And it was kind of like, any day now, it's just going to go under. And then people were worrying about what's going to happen to their music and their playlists and all this stuff. And what was interesting is that we, through working with Sellfy, they have an integration with Sellfy. It's possible for them to you can put your sales widget into your Sellfy account, or into your SoundCloud account. And so on the Sellfy end, you could see from which platforms most purchases were coming. And what was surprising to us was that the most purchases were coming in from SoundCloud. So we saw that there was buying intent on SoundCloud, but SoundCloud itself didn't have the option to buy an album, or buy the merch, or buy the record, or whatever it is. And that could have been a major revenue option for them. And if they're going through these bankruptcy processes, then man, setting up some kind of e-commerce functionality, that can go a long way.
They still haven't done that. They don't have the e-commerce set up. They've got ads now. So if you, as someone who puts music on SoundCloud, if I send someone a link to it, they have to sit through an ad to listen to what I'm trying to send. And it's like, even their little widgets now, if I embed it on my personal website, you've got go to our site. It's I'm very turned off by SoundCloud.
Yeah,
and I almost wish there was another.
That's a missed opportunity. And so we wrote an article, an opinion piece on this is SoundCloud's last chance to monetize its service. And we have the data to back it up that this will work. And so I think it was VentureBeat that took that article. They were super interested in it because everyone was writing about SoundCloud. No one knew what was going to happen. And we were able to provide something new that no one else could offer to that conversation. And that's complete luck that we had in conversation with Sellfy. We asked them, okay, well, what are you guys seeing? What's new? And just through informal conversation, this came up. And at that time, there wasn't this SoundCloud crisis, but a few weeks later there was, and we're like, oh, well, we've got something to say about that.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's a really cool circumstance. And it just goes to show the power of data, I suppose. I wondered if we could sort of shift gears a little bit and maybe talk a little bit about storytelling. So if we've already collected data and we've already landed on maybe some topics that we think are of value, of course, a big part of all this is communicating that stuff in a compelling way. And so I wonder if you wouldn't talk a little bit about just sort of the storytelling process and how we go about, packaging and compiling our data in a way that's interesting to broad market platforms.
Yeah, so that's such a wide topic, and I'm wondering where do I even begin? And I find that when trying to convey information, the most successful approach is being upfront as soon as possible, like immediately telling them, this is what we found. And then because people who read online these days have the attention span of a goldfish. And in fact, I think there was statistics and data that showed that our internet attention span is actually less than the goldfish's attention span these days. So you don't really have a lot of time. So you've got your headline, and then essentially in your first sentence, I usually try and tell the reader what the gist of our findings are. And then you have the rest of the article to expand on that. But being upfront, so you've got your headline that claims one thing, your intro that lays down, we did the study, we found this, and the outcome was that. Why is that? And then you can go into, okay, you can talk about what it means. Methodology is always super important, especially when you're presenting any kinds of data or studies or whatnot. I've found that you don't need to have a huge data set. You don't need to have like academic levels of data analysis. It's enough to observe a trend and offer it at the angle that makes sense for you in that story. Because this isn't a peer-reviewed paper. This is, the impact of TikTok trends on productivity, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be my tip, being as upfront as possible, and then going into the details afterwards, being transparent with the methodology, being transparent with the size of the data sets, outlining why this is relevant. And I also love adding steps that people can take, or how this news can be actionable to someone. So for example, if we're talking about the 52-17 work break ratio, then we might end with different methods on how to implement it in your own life, how to set it up, what kind of timers to use, what to do on your breaks, what the best way is to take the break. Give them a few examples about what they can do during that break. Get up, take a walk, go to the water cooler, make yourself a coffee, take a stroll around your building, that kind of thing.
I also wanted to ask you, just as it pertains to storytelling, about your take on sort of some of these new AI platforms and the importance of working with a professional writer versus just, either doing it yourself or using one of these platforms to do writing. I think that there's such an importance out there for good content these days, considering there's so much clickbait out there and everything else. But I wonder, it's becoming easier and easier to generate content in an automated way, but it's also sort of cheapening the content. And so I wonder if you wouldn't talk about just the benefits of using a professional writer and somebody with some expertise versus maybe one of these platforms.
Yeah, so I think that this majorly depends on what kind of content you're creating and what outcome you're hoping to achieve with that. So personally, my approach to content marketing is always reader first, so to be as helpful as possible to the reader. There are different content marketers that say, no, content is for search engine optimization. And as a result, maybe the article isn't super helpful, but it does get them ranked because they've got the right keywords and the right headlines and whatnot. I do believe that Google eventually will become smart enough to differentiate the two. And so that this will be a winning strategy in the long run anyway. But when it comes to these kind of semi-automatic copywriting tools, I've found that sometimes they're helpful. They're helpful for search engine optimization articles that might have a very defined structure, might have very predictable sentence structures, headlines, paragraphs, conclusions, that kind of thing. But if you're looking to provide really helpful, original information, then the AI isn't going to figure that out for you, especially if that topic is something that's new. So if this is really helpful, then it's likely because someone else hasn't written about that yet, or hasn't written as in-depth about it. So the machine can't fill in those blanks because those blanks have never been filled before. They have nothing to learn from. So maybe consider who you're writing for and for what reason, and go from there. But in terms of PR, what I found interesting is there was a list of careers that are most likely to be replaced by robots in the next, 50 to 100 years, whatever the time span was, and then also the flip. The careers least likely to be replaced by robots. And I found it very interesting that at the top of the list was PR, because the approach to PR is so unpredictable, based on, and we talked about, spotting the trends. Like there's no easy method, there's no algorithm to finding it. It's just observing what's happening and trying to make those connections, which is a highly creative and unpredictable process, and requires a lot of empathy, and it requires a lot of sensitivity, and understanding how different outlets work, how different people work, how they prefer to be pitched and whatnot. That's apparently some professionals had decided that robots and AI is not yet in a position to make those calls yet.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, in every engagement I've had with PR agencies and things like that over the years, I mean, what makes a PR agency valuable tends to be the relationships, the people they know, who do they have on their list, this kind of thing. Because I mean, as far as the writing goes or whatever, you can hire a copywriter, you can do that kind of thing. But if you really want to shop this article around, you do need the expertise of people, right? And I think nowadays, I imagine more than ever, these big media publications are bombarded with requests from, amateur writers and professional writers and robots and email campaigns and everything. And so to break through, you almost do need that human touch still.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I noticed on your LinkedIn profile, you used to work for a company called Content Labs, and the slogan for that was full stack content marketing. And I actually thought that was pretty creative and cool. Just based, coming from development, full stack is front end, back end kind of thing. With Content Labs, it almost sounds like data with results, like the articles. So I kind of just wanted to bring that up and see if that was kind of like your mindset with that, where you were working in the tech field, full stack market. It just kind of, I like that. So
yeah, yeah, I really like your interpretation of it, and it's definitely. I mean, the terminology probably did have some. It's my own company that I had created before establishing Truesix, which I established with the co-founder. Content Labs was my own personal gig before going all in with my co-founder. And and so the full stack marketing was definitely a concept that's borrowed from the tech industry, but it has also become prevalent in the marketing world to describe different kinds of marketing aspects, because we've got content marketing, you've got digital marketing, you've got advertising, you've got pay-per-click, you've got social media marketing. You have all of these different approaches, and so
yeah, I like it. I just wanted to highlight that because it was cool.
Yep, I love it. Next thing I wanted to sort of touch on is sort of, we've gone sort of a little bit through a process here, right? We've talked about the types of data, we've talked about the sorts of topics, and we've talked about the importance of storytelling and copywriting. But now that we've done all those things, where do we put this stuff? So can we talk a little bit about the differences between sort of, I guess, social media marketing and broad market marketing through publications?
Yeah, so there are always different options for your content. And there's this one rule of thumb that for however long it took you to create your one piece of content, you should spend twice as much time distributing it, because it's not enough just to write the stuff or create the stuff. That used to be the thought that if you build it, if you write it, the people will come. It might have been true at one point, but it certainly isn't true anymore. And one of the keys to successful content marketing is actually putting the work in to make sure that people see it. And there are these two different approaches. There's the work you can do on your owned channels, and then there's also the work you can do on external channels. And having a mesh, a combination of the two is probably the best way to go, and making use of as many channels as you can. And of course, that depends on the kind of content that we're talking about at that given time. But if we're talking about, so for example, the original data articles that we were talking about earlier on, then first you have to source the data. You'll probably talk to your programmers about that, and they'll give you an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. And then you go through it and you figure out what the trend is, what you're seeing, and then you have to write it out. If you're approaching a media outlet, then you have to present that data to them in some way. And the most efficient and most accepted format in the industry is to present it via press release. So writing up your outcomes, your methodology, your data set, and like the whatever impact and background, that all goes into your press release. And then you can present that to the journalists, or if you want to write it up yourself, you can go to the editor. In this case, I would go with the journalist, because you can get more bang for your buck. When you write a piece yourself, then it's likely to be picked up by one media outlet, whereas if you go with a press release and you have a piece of news, then any outlet can pick up that piece of news. But they're not interested in republishing opinion pieces that have been published elsewhere because they're competitors with the other media outlets.
So is there like a one-stop shop to submit your press release kind of thing, or do you have to kind of over time find those
tools.
contacts?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are tools for that. Personally, I've never seen much success from press release distribution platforms. I find that they guarantee an absurd number of pickups, like, you know, over 100 media outlets will publish your press release, but it seems to be that they're kind of like automated. So they just like automatically, they have some kind of deal with whatever outlet. In fact, I think they also own a lot of them. Like they made a ton of them just so that they would have somewhere to put those press releases, and a lot of them aren't indexed on Google because, you know, they're considered spammy, understandably. So the higher success rate, and definitely the more difficult route, is creating your media list and approaching journalists one by one, checking out what they write about, what they have written about, and figuring out if that's a topic that they're interested in, and then offering it to them as a piece for them to cover.
So are you like reading an article on finance, seeing who wrote that article, finding them on LinkedIn, sending a connect request, sending them a link to, hey, this is the article I wrote, and then going from there? Or is it like a hit up the newspaper directly and say, hey, can you forward this to your journalist?
Yeah, so there are different options here, but the key in most cases is finding their email address. And sometimes there are media outlets that have their journalists' email addresses listed, for example, TechCrunch. But then there are others where it's not listed on the website, but very often journalists will have their email addresses in their Twitter bios. A lot of tech journalists use Twitter actively, and sometimes it's not listed there either. So then it's an entire process. There's a lot of Googling involved. There are also different methods about how you can find email addresses. If you Google those methods, then I'm sure you'll find these different approaches described. But yeah, and so what I've done with my team at Truesix is just over the years, we just have these databases of journalists, the topics they write about, and their email addresses, and any comments about what kind of previous interaction we've had. And so that when we have a story come up about a certain topic, then we can go back to our list and see, okay, such and such writes about these kinds of things. I'm going to check out what they've been writing recently. If they're still writing about this kind of stuff, they might be interested in this, and then reach out to them personally and say, hi, Susan. We were in touch a few years ago. We've got a new story for you. Or if we weren't in touch a few years ago, then it's, I see that you write about, these topics, and we have some new insights in the industry. Here they are. Let me know if you're interested or if you need any additional info. But one thing that's also very helpful is having that data published on your own website as well. So having your own article that's published on a blog or something like that, which is similar but different to the press release, so that when people ask or they need something to link back to. So for example, I don't know, that DeskTime's original data states that XYZ, they will likely want to link to the original source for legitimacy purposes. So you have to make sure that you have a source for them to link to. So not only are you creating a press release, not only are you creating a media list, but you're also creating content to publish on your own site, which is also helpful from a plethora of other reasons. The fact that you're coming up with cool stuff, you want to have some of the goodness for your own website and domain authority and all that stuff.
How important is the digital aspect of things? So you've got, your article written. How important is the YouTube video to go with it, or the podcast to go with it? Does that add to the element, or does that not really help in regards to SEO or anything like that?
In terms of creating your own podcast and your own YouTube video, or approaching other podcasters?
I guess in terms of just distributing the content you're trying to put out, so you've got this article you just wrote about. Does a supplementing podcasts or supplementing video help get that out to the world, or is it more the media, getting it in front of like TechCrunch? Is that like you're on our podcast for a reason? So I mean, like, there's obviously an element to it. So it's just kind of, I'm kind of curious if you've noticed a trend as far as like what does better, the videos versus the article, or the article or the video.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the content itself and the medium and whatnot. And of course, when you're considering this an outreach campaign, the more different channels, the better. If you have your own YouTube channel, if you have your own podcast, yeah, write about that there, publish it there. If they are just treating external podcasts or YouTube channels as media outlets, just the same as you would with the written news platforms, I mean, that's super relevant, and it might be more relevant depending on the industry you're in. If your product is, I don't know, influencer marketing based, then you might be wanting to go that direction, the YouTube podcast, social media direction, rather than TechCrunch. I mean, it's
hard.
It's about finding your audience, and so figuring out where your audience is hanging out, and once you know where their eyeballs are going, then it's your job to try and get in front of those eyeballs, regardless of where they might be.
I wanted to try and kind of pile on Mike's question there and ask just maybe a little bit differently. How important is exclusivity? Like, is it like if we publish this article on our own, let's say our firm comes up with this data and we decide to run out this article on its own, then at some point in the near future or whatever, we decide to shop it around, or maybe we do it at the same time. Does our publishing of that piece take away from other publishers' ability to use that data, or does it make the story less interesting to other people?
So exclusivity is a really cool card to have at the very beginning. So you can figure out, okay, what's the coolest website that I would love to have pick up this story, and contact them and offer them exclusivity. That you will be the first and the only ones that we're going to talk to about when this news goes live. So if our news goes live next Thursday at 9 a.m., then you are getting you will have sole information about this until that evening when we send it out to everyone else. So by them being able to be the first to publish, it's you have to consider media as any other business. They're interested in serving their customers better, being better than their competitors, and having more interesting content for people to come to and visit and click. So if you think about how can I help them achieve those goals, then one of those ways is to make sure that the data first is available there. So that's exclusivity is one option, and another option that's also really helpful is embargo information data. And this is something that we made use of last summer when we updated the 5217 findings, because it's a study that's 7 years old, and we were wondering if those facts and figures, those numbers have changed, for example, after 2 years of a pandemic, and they had indeed changed. And so we contacted the journalists who had written about our story the first time around and gave them access before. And so an embargo is when you give a journalist a story, but tell them that it can't be published until a certain date and time. So their journalistic integrity doesn't let them break a story faster. And then at that whatever certain date and time, you send it out to the larger masses. But sending that information a week earlier gives them time to conduct their own interviews, conduct their own research, craft things the way they want to. And then they can also be among the first to break the news. And this worked out really well for us. And it landed us a piece in Inc., which was then shared and republished through different formats into different media as well afterwards.
So just a quick follow on to that, and maybe you can just sort of elaborate on a little further. But from a SEO perspective, or I don't know, becoming known as the source of truth or something, is there any real benefit to being first? Like, so, I mean, if you do go out and you do, run this out exclusively on some platform, but then a week later, all that data becomes available to everybody else, like, was there a benefit to that original publisher in being first?
Yeah, it depends on the scale of the news. So essentially, like, if it's big enough news, that means that the traffic is going to stream to their website first. If the topic is that interesting, that it's like super hot and it's a matter of hours that drives these viewers to their website, then it's totally interesting. So, for example, in the case of Printful, when they raised their funding round, I think it was in the fall of this past year, I might be mistaken, and their valuation meant that they became Latvia's first unicorn. I mean, that was a really big deal for the entire country of Latvia, as well as a big story in the Baltics and in Europe in general. And they had an exclusivity deal with a platform, Wall Street Journal, I want to say. And only later was the press release sent out to additional media outlets. But so for a good chunk of time, that was the only place to read about this big news. And then other media outlets that weren't waiting for the press release were using that source and also linking back to that source as proof that this has happened.
Okay, nice, cool. No, I think that's really helpful.
So we're kind of getting to that time. We got a few more minutes left. Can you maybe tell us where people can reach out and find you? And then tell us a little bit about Latvia. Are you from there initially, or did you relocate there? I noticed that you had written an article about relocating to Latvia, and it's interesting to me because it seems almost like it's an up and coming tech place that's trying to get more tech people there. So.
Yeah, I'm originally born and raised in Canada, and I've been living in Latvia for the past 14 years. And I'm half Latvian by descent, so that's why Latvia. And yeah, the tech sector is growing at an unprecedented rate, and the rate of investment in Latvian startups in the past year has just been exponential, and it looks like this coming year is also going to, keep up on par. And Latvia is part of the Baltics, the 3 Baltic countries: Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and altogether they are just such a hot hub right now for startup growth. And it's really exciting to be here, and a lot of innovation is coming out of here. And what's also really exciting is that because they're small countries, they can be really agile in terms of regulation. So there's a lot of national regulation that's being put in place to specifically support, for example, startups or fintechs and whatnot. And thanks to this, for example, Latvia was named the most startup-friendly country in the world last year because of a combination of these different regulations, the last of which was making it possible to give stock options to employees.
Nice.
Very cool. Yeah, and
they're coming out with a digital nomad visa soon. So anyone who wants to come over to Latvia, the more the merrier.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was going to say. Actually, I spent a lot of time working in the remote workspace, and these digital nomad visas are popping up all over. But yeah, I don't know exactly the terms of the Latvian one, but in the case of a lot of them, there's a lot of tax advantages and discounts, and I mean, it's a way to go explore a foreign country and do good work that you enjoy, and experience it in another country, and in some cases, actually maybe make a little more money because you're not paying taxes on that money or whatever the
and the great thing about the Baltic countries is they're part of the European Union, so if you have a visa for one country, you have a visa for everywhere in Europe. Nice. Which is pretty sweet.
Nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Well, yeah. So Julia, just to sort of wrap up, let's tell people where they can find out more about you, learn about your businesses, and how to get in touch with you specifically if they'd like to engage.
Yeah, so you can check out my company, Truesix, truesix.co. Also the same on Twitter. I'm personally on Twitter. I'm at Julia Gifford, JuliaGifford. And definitely check out DeskTime, desktime.com, especially if you're a kind of productivity hacking kind of person. And you can do all kinds of cool productivity studies on your own.
Cool. And we'll put all those links down below. And Truesix, just for everybody listening, is true and the word six. So TRUESIX.co. And so do check that out. And thanks so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a lovely conversation.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.